Hello, everyone, and welcome to Profitable Pastures 2023. My name is Terry Noon, and I am the chair of the Ontario Forage Council. This is the first of 3 webinars for this year's virtual conference. Thank you to the Beef Farmers Ontario for their generous partnership of this year's webinar series. Tonight, we are going to hear from the most recent recipients of the Mapleseed Pasture Award. The award recognizes producers who are doing an outstanding job of pasture management. Todd Payne and his wife Jennifer run Asphodel Sheep Company in Peterborough County. They raise and pasture nearly year-round. Tom Aikins is a first-generation beef farmer in Grey County who has taken an unconventional approach to startup using rented land to establish his herd. At this time, I would like to pass it over to our speakers, Todd and Tom. Thank you.
Thanks, Terry. I think I'm up first here. So yes, I'm Todd Payne, and we farm in Asphodel, Norwood. We have a flock of about 800 breeding ewes in the flock. They're mostly a commercial crossbred maternal composite. Main focus of our farm is breeding stock. We sell pretty much all across Canada. Certainly the majority of our sales are in Ontario here. We market the majority of our ram lambs as meat, and a very small percentage, about 1/4%, actually make flock sires. So we were very grateful to be presented with the Mapleseed Pasture Award. I'm going to share a little bit. Of our what we do here. Not necessarily grazing, but since this is called Profitable Pastures, more about how we extend the pasture season on our farm. We do have sheep outside year-round, and we're just gonna try to take a little look here and show. So I just wanted to show, this is our wintering paddock. This is actually from last year. We had a group of about 550 ewes out on the wintering paddock last year. And there we go. I wanted to show a before and after. So we use a combination of unrolled hay of various qualities and some TMR to feed the sheep when they're out on the wintering paddock. This is a pretty typical feed. I think this group was about 550 last year. This is a pretty typical feed. You can see all the sheep are over on this side of the fence. This is 4-foot tall electronet fence. We don't use the poly electronet fence in the winter time. Right here, you can see a little bit of a wider path. Those are pass-through gates that the sheep can come through. So we go in and feed one side, and then let the sheep come through to the feed. If you put the right amount out for the sheep that are out there. And the really nice fertility spread that's left behind. I can't do that good a job with my manure spreader. This year's group. We had a smaller group out this year. But same idea, just fed on top of the snow. Again, you can see the net fence in the background. We have this paddock split in 2. We have split the paddock as many as 3 ways. So you can actually go out on a Friday, feed all 3 paddocks, and all you have to do on the weekends is just go out and open up gates. So the group this year was a little bit smaller. We had about 250 outside this year. We did a little more winter lambing this year, so we had a few more in the barns. So just a couple of shots of this group out here. We are actually shearing these ewes today and tomorrow. These ewes have come in off, this was a grain corn field. These ewes have come in off this field in tremendously good condition. The other thing I'm going to try to share here is a couple of videos. I wanted to share our grazing corn. This is a group, I think this was last year again. So this is a group that we just turned out on grazing corn. You're probably seeing about late August here, mid to late August. What I wanted to show here is the stage that we turn the ewes into the grazing corn at. You can see there's no tassels, almost no cobs at all, really. And what is there is just 100% milk. So there's really no starch or any risk at this point of any acidosis whatsoever. So really, they're it's just a forage. You can see they're doing an excellent job. This isn't a very big group at all, but they're doing an excellent job of cleaning up almost everything but just the heavy stalks themselves. If you turn them into corn at this point, you can be fairly aggressive with how much you give them, and you really don't have to back it up with any forage at all. So this is actually the same field of corn. Of course, we're a little ways further along. We were working our way down around the one side of it here. We've added a few more sheep to the mob. And of course, the corn has carried on in its growth stages, so we're now tasseled out. This is pretty much like sweet corn. We do supplement at this point with a little bit of baleage. But again, these sheep have been in this corn, for probably about a month now. And again, we've worked them into it and staged them into it. So really no risk of acidosis again at this point, and giving them, a pretty decent strip of corn each day. Okay, so this is basically pretty much gone all the way the other direction. So again, these are sheep that have been in corn grazing all the way up to this point. At this point, we're basically feeding them grain. This was actually a field of grain corn that wasn't terribly good quality corn at the one end of it. So we decided to move some ewes that could use a little more body condition from some silage grazing corn into the grain corn. You can see unrolled on the ground here, we are supplementing with forage at this point. But this is basically just limit feeding them grain each day. And this works tremendously well to put body condition on some slimmer ewes before we get into the breeding season. We just use the electronet fence to strip graze. We are a little more cautious with corn at this stage. We will set out 2 nets at a time, so that if they do push through, they don't get the entire field, and it can be a little hard to find them, but you usually find them when they're not moving so much anymore at that point. So we will double net this to make sure that if they do push through, it's just into the next break.
So Todd, I know that I promised that we'd hold questions until after Tom's talk, but you did freeze up a little bit at the beginning, so we didn't quite hear what it was that you were doing with your winter fencing when you're...
Sure. Okay. So what we're doing with that wintering, what we call the wintering paddock, is we'll go in before freeze up, and we divide that paddock into at least 2, sometimes 3 sections. We do that with the 4-foot tall net fence. We don't use the poly fence in the wintertime because the poly becomes far too brittle. We have pass-through gates between the paddocks. And when we go in to feed, if we've broken the paddock into 3, if we've broken the field into 3 different feeding paddocks, we'll go in and feed one paddock, let the sheep through into that, and then we go in and feed the other 2 paddocks, just unroll the hay, lay some TMR right on the snow. And then that works really nice to do that, say on a Friday. And then all your work is on a Saturday and a Sunday is to go out, open the gates, let the sheep through, feed the dogs, give them a pet, make sure everybody's doing okay. And that's about it. So it's it's all of a 10-minute feed on Saturday and Sunday, or on the off days during the week. Say we feed on a Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. The Tuesday and Thursday is just a 10-minute go out and open to let the sheep through.
Thanks for telling us that bit again, Todd. We appreciate you going back and filling us in there. Was there anything else you're planning to share about your farm right now?
I think I'll leave it at that. That's what I wanted to share, really, Christine, at this point is just how we extend our grazing season. The grazing corn really does get us through that gap, especially if it's a dry year too. It gets us through that sort of that forage gap that you always have in August and September, and you shouldn't really be grazing your good stuff at that point. So it gets us through August, September, October, till we can maybe start laying some feed on the ground for them. So I think I'll leave it at that and maybe take questions later, I guess.
That sounds great. So Tom, I'll invite you to switch your video back on and tell us a little bit about your operation, please.
Hello. Congratulations to Todd on his pasture award. Looks like he's doing some really neat stuff. I'd love to come by and get a tour sometime and see the rest of it. I am Tom Aikins, and yeah, like they said, started my beef farm first generation in the Ravenna area of Grey County. And thank you again to Mapleseed and DFO and Forage Council for letting me be the recipient this year. So just a little bit of a farm overview before I go into it. So like I said, we established in 2018. Right now we're running about, I have 40 cows of my own, then I custom feed about 15 cows for a neighbor. I retain my own heifers for breeding stock. We graze roughly 70 acres, give or take, and hay about 200 acres, and then about 60 acres of cash crop just to rotate some of our rougher fields and get them back into the quality of production we're looking for. So they asked me to talk a bit more about how I got started into agriculture, but we will get to my grazing here in a minute, and I'll share a bit more about that later. But so I didn't grow up on a farm, but when I was around 17, I decided I might like to try it. So I got a job on a dairy farm, and I co-opted grade 12 at a beef farm, and I'm still working there actually today, and gained a lot of experience that way. That got me hands-on with some cattle and a little bit of cash crop work and some hay work, and no better way to learn than to get right in there and do it. So from there, after about a year, I co-opted, and then I worked for them for about a year, and then after that they said, you're kind of stepping on our toes a little bit. Maybe you should express your ideas elsewhere and start it on your own. So I had the opportunity to rent a farm that was pretty close to them, and they were very helpful in getting me started there, and have a great relationship today around that. But yeah, what can I say about that? So this farm that I started to rent, it was still maintained, but it was getting down in quality. The guy was about 85, so he thought it might be time to retire. So we started renting there, and I think I started in April, and had cows there just the beginning of June. I think it was around my 19th birthday we put the cows in. So we had a string fence. We put up a yard fence. There wasn't anything there for fences, and seeded down some fields, and we started grazing cattle. I'll get into that in another slide here just in a minute. So one of the things, if you want to be getting into it and you don't have another way, you kind of got to take the good with the bad and the ugly, because beggars can't really be choosers. So when I first started, I was working a lot at night because I was working through the day, and then everywhere I looked, I needed to be fixing something. So we put a lot of work into the barn where I was renting, and that middle picture there, you can see my mouse. That's a hay field. It was a pasture, and then it was let go. So there's actually thorn trees, and we bush hogged that to try and get that down. My next slide, I got a video of that actually. I don't know if they'll come up or not. Let me know if you can't see these. This is us bush hogging the trees out of this pasture and turning it into a hay field, we hope, fingers crossed. And then if you look over here, I decided that was taking too long. So bought myself a disc vine and decided I should abuse it. So we actually cut and baled this and fed it to some dry cows, which it works. I wouldn't recommend it. Part of getting into agriculture, you kind of got to be young and stupid and know that stuff, you shouldn't do stuff, but don't know that. So definitely learned a lot moving forward. And I might not do that again. So like I said, you gotta, as I was getting into it, I started out really small. I didn't really want to take out a lot of debt. So I started the first 2 years just with that open station tractor up in the top left-hand corner. And I bought myself a $600 hay bine, and it would cut about 30 acres before it would blow up, and I'd have to fix it all again. And then I've just slowly been increasing my capital and equipment since then, trying to get stuff that would last a little bit longer and make the jobs a little bit easier. So just that constant reinvesting into the farm and not having a lot of other hobbies has really helped me grow over the last 5 years. With that, I've always wanted to do my best in everything, and maybe that's because I care what the guy on the other side of the fence thinks. But if you do that, I find that it helps in future things, because people are kind of looking at you and maybe want to give you an extra hand if they know you're going to do a good work with it. So along with that, I wanted to have a good handle on my finances. I didn't want a big debt load, but I wanted to know that if I wanted to buy a baler, I had enough hay being sold that I was going to be able to pay for it. Just simple like that. I'm not doing the most complicated books in the world, but I'd like to know where my money is and where it's going. And then kind of the last two is keep it simple. At least that works for me, because I don't have to be thinking about it all the time. I can have more things on the go if it's simple, and it has to work for you, for where you're at. So as I invest more, we're getting more intensive and it's becoming more complicated, but a lot of the times you just kind of got to do what's going to work for you when it's going to work for you, and hope that gets you through for the time being and keep improving. So getting into the grazing systems, like I said, it's got to work for you. So we are doing a lot of rotational grazing and some strip grazing, which is kind of, when I say rotation, it's kind of either once a day and up to 5 days. But there are some pastures that we do some continuous grazing on. There's some rougher pasture farms that I have where we only really get one growth of grass. So I'll let the cows out there and they'll be out there for a month, just because it's not really worthwhile breaking it up. There's not really anything to go back and chew on. And then later in the fall, if we start grazing hay fields or something, I'll give them a lot bigger stretch of that, just because we're busy. And again, there's not going to be that regrowth that they're going to come back and nip off that I'm worried about. And then we do kind of a modified bale grazing, which I'll get into later, similar to what Todd does, but not quite that intensive yet. So like I said, this is the first farm I started renting. When we started renting, I hope you can see my mouse here, we had this 5-acre field. That's where I put them in, and I didn't have anywhere else to go with them. And when it was time for them to move, I fenced this chunk. And then when it's time for them to move, I fenced this chunk. So we were kind of flying by the seat of our pants. But in the end, it kind of worked out for the short term anyway. And from there, in further years, I did split these up. So this became 2 pastures. Sometimes I'd split this one again. And then I think at the end there, we were running between 8 and 10. And then if I wanted to poly divide, I had the ability to do that. And then later on, we would supplement that with second cut hay out of this field. This farm, they had good page wire around the roads, but this backs over the Collapore Swamp, and there was no fence there. The cows would wander out there in July and come back when the snow got too deep and they were looking for a bale of hay. So we started stringing fence and busting this up just to divide it. These fields here were a golf course, being up close to the barn. So done a lot of work there to kind of regenerate them and try and get them growing back. And then broke up a couple of these fields, just trying to get the groundhog holes out of the way. This is some of that rougher pasture. This probably should have been a gravel pit. So this is where we're actually winter feeding right now. And I'm excited to see what that's going to look like in the next grazing season. We have bale grazed across this already, and it went from a golf course to being waist high and thick enough that you'd trip if you tried to run through it in about a year. I was pretty impressed, and a lot of that was to do with getting those nutrients back out there, but also having to do with just giving it a rest, breaking it up with poly wire. And we continue to do that as we invest more in the fence every year, just because I don't have the time to do it all in 1 year, but we're slowly improving as we go. So just the last bit I have here is on the winter feeding. So you don't need a lot of infrastructure. This is the majority of what I do it with is this 4-wheel drive loader tractor with open station. Just carry 2 bales out to where they're eating. There's the odd day, we live in Great County, where we get too much snow and I take the blower out and blow a trail back there and feed the cows. My cows don't see a barn. So where we're wintering now, we have a good bit of cedar bush that they can get behind. And even when I do it in more open places, usually there's a hollow or a building that they can get behind to get out of the wind on some of those really nasty days. So we're trying to set bales down. I don't feed the hay I'm feeding right now in feeders. If I got some nicer feed, I'll put it in a feeder, but the stuff I'm feeding right now, polite guys would call it cow hay and some dairy farmers would call it junk. So we set the bale down and I try to keep basically the cow's tails touching when they're eating the bale, and then they'll spread it out like this and we'll get the nutrients out of there. I find if you put the bale down in the same place more than once, they pound it up too much and you don't get that grass regrowth the next year. You can get away with it a bit, but I don't like to push it. I like to give the grass as much of a chance in the spring as it can. And then just a calculation that I did was kind of, if you have about 10 acres, you can feed about 40 cows across that without hitting the same place twice. And then I just kind of try and plan it out that I'll leave a nice hilly spot for the spring where they can get a little higher and drier when things start to thaw out and get a little muddier. So this is just some other pictures. You can see how close I'm trying to get the bales and then have them spread it out. And then this is kind of what it looks like when I'll feed them again. They'll clean that up a little bit more, but that's your nutrient placement. And I don't think they're wasting a lot more than they would in a feeder in a yard. And it saves me hauling the manure spreader out in the spring and the fall. So that's really all I had. If you want to contact me, my email is down there at the bottom, but I appreciate your time and appreciate being honored with this reward, and good luck with your grazing and farm on. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Tom. I guess it is time to launch into some questions. There's been things coming in the chat. Todd, one of the early questions that came in, what variety of corn, what hybrid are you using for your corn grazing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess if we are actually planting corn for grazing, we will try to use a silage variety. Usually it's the last corn that we will plant. We do crop a fair bit. We'll grow about 600 ton of grain corn a year for sale and value add through the sheep. And we grow a few different varieties. So usually at the end of a planting season, you have about a half a bag of, a little bit of this variety and a little bit of that variety. Grazing corn is a great way to use that up. I guess what I have got into doing the last couple of years is, like I showed in that last video, everybody's cornfields that they're going to run through the combine always seem to have some spots that probably aren't worth driving the combine through. And like Tom said, a lot of that is nutrient placement issues. If you can shove the sheep in there and let them harvest the corn for you, number one, it makes you feel better when you're driving in the combine because you're not driving through the crappy stuff. But number two, you're placing the nutrients back exactly where they need to be. And there's no nutrient removal on those, lighter, sandier spots that we have a lot of here.
All right, we have a pile of questions about water for both of you. So I guess, Tom, I'll start with you. How are you getting water to your cattle?
They got a frost-free water bowl at the barn, so there's a lot of exercise involved on their behalf, and I don't mind that. Another group I have at that first farm that I showed you, there is a spring at the back that I have them going to now. I fenced them out of the spring source, and then I've given them a small chunk where it kind of widens out that they can get at that water and it never freezes up on them.
Okay. Todd, what about you? How are you watering those sheep in the winter?
So the winter sheep, they get the snow. We're turning ewes out there after a breeding is done. So usually it's late December when they go out. We do, manage it to make sure there's some snow on the ground If we're getting just small snowfalls, we will go out and sort of push some up into some piles to extend it. The reality is their their water requirements at that stage in their production cycle are pretty low. And on cold days, they won't drink that much, even if it's in front of them. Certainly there is moisture going out in our TMR. But yeah, we don't really mess around with water on the wintering.
Okay. Tom, you showed us a few different grazing systems that you're using. When you're doing a rotational or a strip grazing system, how much rest are you trying to give that grass, or what are you looking for to know when it's rested?
I'm looking for a thick stand when I go back in. I'm probably a little too aggressive on the front end and want them to clean up the pasture that they're in before I move them to the next one. And that's probably part of my downfall, I would say. But I'm looking for a good stand of grass coming back, and probably, I like it to be fairly thick because I like them to be in there for a good bit. So probably knee high, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So Todd, we also wanted to get a bit more clarification on when you're grazing corn. So I know that you showed us a few different times of year, but how does the corn grazing fit into your overall forage, your overall grazing strategy throughout the year?
So the grazing corn works really nice for our ewes that we run through our single sire program. So these are ewes that every year will lamb about the 10th of April. So they go and so we lamb them out. That they lactate for us 8 to 10 weeks, dry them off, and we send them off to rough grazing through the summer. The grazing corn works really nice as to kickstart them back into a weight gain cycle, so a flushing cycle, really. So ramping them up on that grazing corn, like the first video I showed, it very much in the vegetative stage, and it's really just like giving them really good quality forage. And that works nice at the time of year when forage options are starting to get a little bit thin. You're in late August and into September when we shouldn't be grazing some of our better stuff. We do graze like sorghum, say that's coming back on a third cut. We will graze that right up to frost. We don't generally go in there with the mature sheep. We like to put our own replacement ewe lambs in there because that's pretty nice, soft, palatable grazing for them. The mature ewes can handle the grazing corn really well. So we keep them in there. They'll be in there for a couple of months. And as that corn matures and slowly turns into grain, the energy intake increases. And then we supplement a bit with some good quality baleage at that point. And it's just a good, easy way to get body condition on them and get them ready for breeding.
All right, thank you. Tom, have you got any problems with foot rot or some other health concerns by having cattle outside in the spring, kind of during that mud season?
No, touch wood, we haven't had problems with that. I guess I've been doing it for about 5 years now, and I've probably treated 3 cows for foot-related stuff. I've been very fortunate to not have a lot of problems that way at all. We're not calving till end of April, early May, so hopefully it's dried up. And most of those pastures, I got some hills in them where I can put the cows up there, and I'll try and I'll be feeding them all winter in one place, and then when we start to get into calving, I'll move them to kind of a fresh pasture that's a little higher, just to keep them drier, keep them out of the mud, and then they'll be calving on a clean paddock type of thing.
Okay. So Todd, we've had a couple of questions about fencing. So kind of two of them. The first one is the electric netting and snow. How do you deal with that? And the other one is electric netting and running it through the corn. How do you manage load on the fence in that situation?
So we'll go with the snow one first. So when we first put it out there, obviously the netting has to go in before freeze up. We will energize that from our mains energizers. We have a 36 joule mains energizer. The U's are all pretty net fence trained around here. You know, they figure it out pretty quick. We will keep that energized until the snow load determines that we can't. And by that time, you don't need it to keep the sheep in. And we do run the dogs in with the sheep. You know, the net fence isn't really going to keep any predators out. It's the dogs, the deterrent from the dogs that keep the predators out. The grazing corn, it's a bit of work with the net fence. We go through, we have a small loader tractor that we can float the bucket on. So we go through the grazing corn and we'll smash a couple of rows of it down. And if you do it the right way, you walk through the same way with your fence so it doesn't get all hung up on the corn on you. And we'll fence in, say a full strip all the way down the field, and then block that off into sections, you know, to remove each day or every couple of days, depending on how many sheep you got in there and how much you're trying to get them to eat. The fencing in the corn is a fair bit of work. That's a sweat job for sure.
I have heard about an alternative approach to that, which is if your planter's not too wide compared to the size of your flock, leaving a gap when you plant. But you have to know that you're going to graze it, like at the beginning of the year when you're planting corn, to actually leave a gap to put the fence through.
Yeah,
those breaks set. So that takes a lot more future planning than kind of a flip partway through the season. Yeah.
You're right, Christine, it does, but I would say you're giving up yield. You're wasting space, right? The dirt's there. We gotta grow as much as we can out of it. Plus all your neighbors think you screwed up on the planter too, so.
All right. Speaking about fencing, Tom, what fencing have you had the best of luck with as far as quality and pricing goes? Whether that's wires, posts, insulators, whatever stuff you've tried.
So that first farm that I started renting, we outlined it all with one strand of 14 gauge, and that stretches. And then it was all probably a handful of solid wood posts, and then all step-in stakes from there. Doing it again, I do high tensile, 1 or 2 strand, and then I bought all my step-in stakes used, those Gallagher step-in stakes, and then Gallagher insulators. They work for me. The pigtail stakes might be a better option, but I like the adjustability when you got different size animals and rolling terrain that way. And then, yeah, I just typical insulators that we get at the co-op.
Okay.
Good fencer though.
Pardon?
You need a good fencer. You need a good fencer.
You had a good fencer. Okay, noted. Yeah, so I know Tom gave us a bit of an intro into his operation and being a first generation farmer and not following that typical succession plan in his talk. But Todd, I know that you also didn't do the maybe very, very common like parent to child succession plan. Do you mind telling us a little bit about how you guys ended up farming where you're farming?
Sure. Yeah, we didn't, I did actually grow up on a farm. My parents had a small beef farm. I maybe they ran about 20 cattle, I guess, and cow calf to finish there. I didn't mind it, but I didn't really love the cattle. And when it came time for options to head off to school, I did a mechanical engineering degree and then did an apprenticeship and became a tool and die maker. Spent 20 years in industry. we ended up purchasing my parents' farm about 2 years after all the cattle were gone. And we got into some cash cropping, just sort of, on the side, a little side hustle maybe. Was really enjoying that and fairly decent with the mechanical end of things. We did that for about 5 years, and we had an old bank barn on the farm. That was our previous farm, and we wanted to get it making some money for us. I didn't really necessarily want to go down the cattle road again because I didn't maybe see the business payoff in it for us. So we decided to come and talk to, at that time, our neighbors, John and Edie Steele, that were about a mile to the south of us. So we got into sheep from them and kind of worked back and forth with them a bit for the next 4 years or so. Our business was successful enough that I actually stepped away from my full-time job and became full-time on the farm. So at that point, we were running a cash crop sheep, and I had a machine shop at the farm that I had a few customers at. John being one of those customers. John came over to pick up a job one day and said they were retiring and getting rid of the sheep. So that kind of got my brain turning a little bit, and we had a few kitchen table meetings and took a few years to sort everything out. But basically we purchased their farm and at that time what they called the elite flock, which was a performance recorded flock. And I guess we're about 3 years into a 18-year plan now. So
Very good. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, because it's it's not the normal succession story that we hear about, but it's another option for sure. To both of you have taken a less conventional path in, but you're both doing some great stuff. So Todd mentioned an 18-year plan. Tom, what are your farming plans in the next 5 years? We'll be slightly less ambitious than 18.
Tread water.
Pardon?
Tread water.
Water.
Yeah, so dealing with rented land, it's hard to get anybody to sign a lease that's longer than 5 years. So I'm kind of bouncing with the wind, what I can get, where I can get it, and setting up fence, taking down fence. I'd like to grow the cow herd as much as I can with the land base that I have. So probably the next 5 years we'd get up to 60, 65 cows. And yeah, I don't know, see where that takes us.
Okay. So what was the best bit of grazing advice or real light bulb moment for either of you when it comes to your grazing management?
Yeah, I guess when you talk about actual, grazing of forage, certainly when it comes to sheep, the biggest challenge is always the parasites. We did try to follow the model that was used by the previous owners. They would graze ewes and lambs in a mob. Even the performance recorded flock would be lambed out through the barns through jugs, and they would get mobbed up and grazed, rotationally grazed. We had a stab at that a couple of years in a row. I wasn't pleased with how we were able to do it. Probably my lack of grazing management. It's very, very difficult. We found it very difficult to stay ahead of the parasites in the lambs. So unfortunately, my aha moment there was we don't graze our ewes and lambs anymore. All of our replacement ewe lambs go out to grazing, but it's later in the year when the parasite load is reduced. But we do want them to get some tolerance to parasites, so it is important to expose them in that first year. And then by the time we send the gray ewes, the dry ewes out to rough grazing, they're pretty experienced already and certainly have parasite tolerance. We are involved in a project actually right now with the University of Guelph, trying to identify genetic markers for parasite tolerance is something we'd like to grow in the flock. But that's my aha moment, is that we don't really graze, we don't lactate, I'll say, on grass anymore.
Mhm. All right, Tom, what about you? A breakthrough moment or a light bulb moment?
I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel, so we're doing basically the same thing everybody else does. At this time, I can't recall something like that. I think education and that kind of stuff is more of a trickling than a flood. So just picking up, you can always pick up something from somebody else and try something, just tweak it a little bit until you've tweaked it into your masterpiece, I guess we'll say.
Okay. All right, I think we've got through all the questions in the chat. Thank you both so much, and I will turn it back over to Terry.
Thank you, Tom and Todd. That was excellent. Appreciate you taking the time to be here this evening. And that was great to also just to see that, kind of look into your farms, and as Christine mentioned, that kind of unconventional path to where you guys are too is a good story to hear as well. I invite everyone to tune in tomorrow evening at 8 o'clock as well for session 2 of the Profitable Pastures. And it's just a reminder, it is a 3-night sessions, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of this week. And I invite everyone back here tomorrow night for our next round of speakers. Thank you for attending, and see you all tomorrow night. Have a good evening.